I ask when this moment of silence begins that you remember the 2.6 million women across the nation that are being diagnosed and living with this disease. That you remember those that are gone, and that you remember those of us still standing here suffering from this disease. And you remember the families who are out there hoping that they're not next.
6 years ago, a very close friend of mine died of breast cancer. And during the past 6 years, several people close to me have been diagnosed. I don't know if I would say that every time I turn around, someone else is diagnosed with breast cancer. That may be a bit of an exaggeration, but it did certainly reach the point where I felt the need to do something. And since rowing is my sport, this kind of a project came to mind.
Rick Shalvoy had a dilemma. In 1991, the Long Island lifeguard lost his childhood friend Robin to breast cancer. In the intervening years, the disease had taken more and more women he knew, and he couldn't stop thinking about how unjust that was. Too many of Long Island's mothers, daughters, and sisters were dying from breast cancer. In 1997, Shalvoy decided to do something. He rose in the ocean to stay in shape, and he envisioned a Row for the Cure, a walkathon on water, where Long Islanders would pledge money for miles, all for breast cancer research. Rick Shalvoy was going to row 250 miles around Long Island. In August of that year, Shalvoy did what no one had done before. Launching from Jones Beach with great fanfare, he rowed for a cure around Long Island, battling the elements and the ocean current. It took him a week, but he did it. The motivation for this incredible feat of bravery and physical courage is this inescapable fact. Long Island has become a place where a battle is being fought. This is a battle whose outcome is measured in lost lives, damage to families, and erosion of the very fabric of suburban existence. Breast cancer is the enemy. Breast cancer has invaded Long Island, taking a harsh toll in human lives. In the last decade, Long Island has had the highest incidence of breast cancer in the nation. But Long Islanders have fought back, forming a strong activist movement. The stakes in this fight are lethal. Literally, who shall live and who shall die. It is a fight that Long Islanders intend to win. Long Island, New York is a beautiful place, bordered by the Long Island Sound and the Atlantic Ocean, and framed by the North Shore's rocky coast and open expanses of sandy beach to the south. Long Island embodies the American suburban dream. People move here in pursuit of the good life, often driven by the search for split-level paradise. In the early part of the century, Long Island was a major agricultural area, rural, open, and spacious. The end of World War II marked an eastward migration for many city dwellers. They moved to Long Island, trading an urban landscape for a chance to live in a country-like setting. Long Island's famous potato fields were developed seemingly overnight into dozens of new communities, often located within an easy commute to a job in a booming economy. Historian Barbara Kelly is professor and curator of the Long Island Studies Institute at Hofstra University. She's written Expanding the American Dream, Building and Rebuilding Levittown, which explores the post-war suburbanization of Long Island.
We began over 300 years ago as an agricultural community, and from that time, the city has been moving ever eastward in ripples along the island. By the 1920s, the area we are in, Hempstead, was a full-blown suburb with people commuting into the city. But it was the GI Bill and the post-war era that really exploded suburbanization here on the island. Levittown, of course, being the kind of quintessential American suburb, but there were suburbs all over that were being built in the years after the war. The GI Bill brought forth a spate of housing development here on the island that was being encouraged very much by the government. Needless to say, the minute you begin to develop subdivisions, you begin to need services. So the services attract business. And by the 1950s, the government was in the highway industry in full flare. And the highways, of course, included such things as the Long Island Expressway, which allowed people to move ever further east.
During this post-war period, farms were quickly replaced by homes with spacious yards, schools, shops, and Little League baseball diamonds. For many, it was the American dream. The affluence of the post-war expansion was largely viewed as a period of great progress, but Kelly's research has taught her that progress does not come without a price.
Progress in itself is not the problem. I think the problem is that technologically we are able to progress faster than perhaps we are able to absorb the problems we create. We certainly learned that pesticides were a problem and we banned them. The problem is perhaps that we didn't learn that early enough.
Many people suspect that turning the farmlands of Long Island into subdivisions did have hidden costs. Do pesticides remain in the soil, seeping into the ground? Is Long Island's groundwater the environmental link to breast cancer? While scientists continue to probe the exact correlation, one fact beyond debate is this. As the population of Long Island moved eastward, the rising incidence of breast cancer appears to have migrated as well.
The thing that I see as significant is that the breast cancer rate seems to have the same time lag as the two wars. That is, that the veterans of World War II came back to Nassau, and 6 or 8 years later, the veterans of Korea came back to Western Suffolk. And if you look at the way it seems to break down for the cancer incidence, there seems to be that same 6-year time lag, that Nassau was the highest rate, and now it's Western Suffolk, and it seems to be that same 6 to 8 year difference.
As a result of these changes, Long Islanders have transformed the way they view breast cancer. Discussion of breast cancer has moved from the hushed tones of family conversation to the very public outcry surrounding what could be termed a regional epidemic. Rick Shalvoy's reaction of needing to do something was very typical. Activism is often born when an ordinary person undergoes an extraordinary transformation. For many breast cancer activists, this often coincides with the diagnosis of their own cancer. Jerry Barish is a breast cancer survivor who spends the majority of her time actively fighting the battle. Before her own breast cancer, she lived the typical life of an American wife and mother whose primary focus involved taking care of others. When she was diagnosed, in fact, her initial reaction concerned her family.
When you're told that you have cancer, you wonder what you're going to go through. Am I going to see my children? Am I going to see my husband? How am I going to go home and tell my family? Your entire life changes, and it's never, ever the same. Whether you are cured, whether you are told that it's fine and they got it, it doesn't matter anymore. You are not the same person that you were before. It's all different. Life is different.
The breast cancer experience changes women and their families. Starting with the diagnosis, their lives are turned upside down. Decisions must be made that touch every facet of family life. While every woman has to battle the cancer cells in her own body if she hopes to survive, many Long Island women have looked beyond themselves and their families. Some became activists. Barish was like most women in the community of Harbor Isle in the early 1960s. They lived the lives of typical suburban housewives and mothers. Her second bout with cancer changed all of that.
I was 42 when I was first diagnosed. I had it twice. The second time, I was 43. I had it a year later. And so I needed to speak to people that were my age when diagnosed, that were living cancer-free.
During the 1980s, there was a growing number of Long Island women with similar needs. They found each other through the Breast Cancer Support Program at Adelphi University on Long Island. Empowering each other, the women at Adelphi organized the nation's first breast cancer hotline.
Breast Cancer Hotline, Cecilia speaking.
The hotline's office became a center of information staffed by survivors. For the first time, women who were angry and motivated to do something had a place to gather. The School of Social Work gave birth to much of the current activism on Long Island and served as ground zero for these emerging activists.
There was activism as part of it right from the beginning. The director of the program, Leah Lauder, with Senator Michael J. Tully, had hearings on issues of concern revolving around breast cancer. Jane Gitlin was there at one of those hearings where she had a very long list, thousands of names that she had collected through her newspaper, The Women's Record, of people who said, let's do something about breast cancer.
At that time, Long Islanders were beginning to focus on the problem. They found not answers, but frustration in a series of New York State-sponsored reports which examined ethnic, socioeconomic, and lifestyle factors, but did not thoroughly investigate any potential correlation between the environment and breast cancer on Long Island. The report's conclusion was that no further research was necessary. This conclusion was met with disbelief in some quarters and anger in others. For breast cancer victims on Long Island, this was a turning point. Once again, Adelphi was their town common.
At one of our breast cancer forum, which is a lecture on a breast cancer issue, one woman from the audience got up and was talking about the care she received when she was diagnosed with breast cancer.
And her mother had had breast cancer, and 20 or 25 years prior to that, the treatment was the same.
The women in the audience got very agitated and angry and started talking about what was happening and why wasn't progress going on. And there were two women in the audience, Marie Quinn and Fran Critchick, who founded 1 in 9 eventually.
And Fran and Marie were enraged, and that was enough to push them forward and say, let's do something.
And approached the then director of the Adelphi program to guide them on how to do some local and national advocacy.
And came to Barbara Balaban, who was then the director of the program, and said, we've got to do something about breast cancer.
I had not been successful in getting the women I was working with on the hotline to be very interested in the political, because they were having enough to do dealing with all the women that were calling and having to try and support them and help them and see them through the process. And one's energy can only go so far. Marie Quinn called for an appointment. She asked me to help her set up a meeting of people who wanted to do something politically. The lady, I've been waiting for you for over a year.
With Balaban's help, Quinn and Critchick organized a meeting, writing to everyone on Adelphi's mailing list.
And in that letter, Marie said, you know, if you want to learn about breast cancer, if you want to learn how to lobby, if you want to become involved in a political action group, come to this meeting on November 27th, 1990.
The conversation that night focused on the recently released reports from the New York State Department of Health. The reports associated high-income areas with a higher probability of developing breast cancer. If the Department of Health thought that establishing this relationship would answer women's questions, they were grossly mistaken.
They were just making the blanket statement, high-income areas. I said, what do you mean by high-income areas? What is that relationship? Is it the ink on the money, the paper in the checkbook? I mean, what is it? You know, go away, little girl kind of attitude.
One of the questions asked that night was, how many people in this room are in the high-risk category? And I think there were 4 of us.
At the meeting, there were 57 people there, and we took a poll of all the people who fell into this high-risk factor. And amazing, the majority of the people did not fall into this category.
And it was a shock, because there were women in that room that were all ages, all colors, all backgrounds, all sizes, all shapes. Some lived in Long Island, some just moved to Long Island. So there were many questions that needed to be answered.
We read the New York State survey that had been done by New York State Health Department and Stony Brook University, delineating the high risk factors for breast cancer. And they said, you had your babies late in life, you didn't breastfeed your children, you didn't do exercise, you ate a high-fat diet, you are on a high socioeconomic level, you may be Jewish and you may be old and there may be a genetic factor. But basically what they were saying is, hey baby, it's your fault you got breast cancer. And we did not accept that at all. This was not acceptable.
And then they ended up the report by saying no further studies are necessary at this time, and I absolutely blew my top, because one of the things that research is supposed to do is generate questions for further research, so I knew that that was wrong.
At that time, the national statistics were 1 out of every 9. And so we decided to form a group, take those statistics. We rented space at Adelphi. And that was the beginning of the first New York State grassroots organization.
Based on those statistics, they formed 1 in 9, the Long Island Breast Cancer Action Coalition. The members of 1 in 9 struggle to find a connection between themselves and their cancer. Privately and publicly, many fear that living on Long Island might be the real link.
I do not have a family history of breast cancer. That was one of the things that was so devastating when I found out that I had breast cancer, because no one in my family had had it. And you kind of ask questions, well, why me? Where did it come from?
I have no family history. I have the risk factors, I can go down the list, and they don't necessarily apply to me. I live on Long Island. Is that my risk factor? I don't know.
I am here to say right now that breast cancer is unacceptable.
Through 1 in 9, women began to demand real answers about their cancer. Their first step was to raise hell and get the attention of the media and of politicians who control the dollars and the power. In October 1991, 1 in 9 held its first public rally.
We need better studies, better medications, better early detection, better research, better legislation, better everything.
There have been many advances in cancer, but not enough money to breast cancer issues. And it is now our time.
We invited all of the legislators. Shockingly, they all showed up and they stood behind us. And it was a very big surprise because 350 women came. They came with signs that said, "Please don't let my mommy die." They came with their wigs on the end of broomsticks. They came in wheelchairs because they were on chemotherapy. It was the most unbelievable scene, and I'll never forget it. It put us on the map because the next day we made the front page of our newspaper.
The rally's success put breast cancer on the public's agenda. For the activists, the next step was to press for a more comprehensive report on Long Island's breast cancer puzzle. They began building their case by gathering epidemiologists from around the country to take a fresh look at the New York State report. Their intent was to parlay the scientists' conclusions into a request for federal funding for a new study.
And the reason it should be done in Long Island, not that we had the highest incidence of breast cancer in the world, but because we had everything here that could be studied in one area. We had the most open waste sites. We had the most golf courses in any one state, in any one particular area. There was everything that we could do here. And this would set the example for the rest of the world. It was just one small problem. We needed $5 million. So where do you go? We went to Washington.
We realized, and Congress realized, that breast cancer had a face. Not only had a voice, but it had a face. And the face was going to be in front of them, and they were going to be in the congressmen's faces all the time. And we have been, and we learned that that's one of the best strategies that we can use, is to be there as people and as stories, as human stories. Not to try and raise pity, but to try and help people understand that there are real problems. There are real problems that have to be addressed, and we need to be doing something different about breast cancer.
We would let them know that we put them in office. We would let them know that our vote counted and that they were accountable to us. We decided to form this organization and go to Albany and go to Washington and knock on those doors, and we would demand to be seen and heard and not stop until we entered into their doors.
The activists needed politicians who could be convinced to help undo the logjam of research dollars. The women from Long Island knocked on the door of New York Senator Alphonse D'Amato.
The 1 in 9 women from Long Island, who are part of the National Breast Cancer Coalition, came in and said, Senator, we demand, they didn't ask, we demand more funding in this area. And they educated me. They spent the time and they brought this brilliant doctor, researcher down with them, went through all of the programs, went through the NIH budget. And I said, well, what about if I got a doubling, went from 50 million to 100 million? And they said, no way. We want $250 million more. They were strong, they were persistent.
With the promise of federal dollars, 1 in 9 moved its agenda forward, becoming a model for other breast cancer groups in the country. When Jerry Barish became the organization's president in 1993, 1 in 9 intensified work on the nation's first pesticide registry.
I mean, we couldn't worry about the world, but we had to start setting an example in New York State of what was to happen on the federal level. We were very concerned with why people were getting cancer. There was questions that about pesticides, and we weren't getting any answers. And so we decided that that was unacceptable, that this was our lives, and we wanted to know what we were eating, what we were breathing, what we were stepping on.
Now there should be a reason for that. Is it the pesticides? Because where I live in Westbury was a former potato field. So that's where our houses were, built on potato fields.
I know my mother and father talked about the potato fields, and I remember years ago when they used to spray and the kids would run behind the trucks, and it's just, it's possible that those things have gotten into the ground and are now coming up. I don't know.
Many activists believe that the use of pesticides, first on potato farms and then on suburban lawns, parks, and golf courses, was a big part of the problem. 1 in 9 began to push for legislation that would unmask the potential chemical dangers in Long Island's environment. They wanted to know where the pesticides were used and stored, and they wanted that information in the form of an easily accessible database. They also wanted pesticides to be registered as dangerous substances and ultimately restrict their usage statewide.
And we felt that there might be a relationship between pesticides that are used on Long Island and our cancer. We don't know. How do you go about proving this?
We needed to have stronger standards and rules and regulations, and we needed to know that if something was being used in a particular strength, why was it being used if it was something that should not be, if it was carcinogenic. And there were so many pesticides that should have been restricted that were not.
In July 1996, 1 in 9's efforts culminated in the passage of New York State's pesticide registry bill.
I think the pesticide registry and that database was one of the triumphs, was one of the most important pieces of legislation that New York State could ever have.
This major piece of legislation established a water quality monitoring system and significantly improved pesticide record-keeping and reporting requirements statewide.
No one will be satisfied until we ascertain the cause of breast cancer and implement a cure. But until that time, the tools of education and early detection are the best tools we have.
1 in 9's efforts have also been particularly effective at the county level. Nassau County's top elected official, Tom Galata, has been a strong supporter of breast cancer advocates. Under his leadership, Nassau County has championed a number of breast cancer initiatives. He believes that the county government has an obligation to help in these areas.
When I entered public service, it became a key issue of mine working with others in the community. That's the reason that I'm so proud that Nassau County established the very first no-cost mammography program, the very first in the nation, and it has been used as a prototype in other areas of the nation. We have now taken the mobile van to where women are, so that the issue of inconvenience is put aside. We're bringing the mammography to you if you don't have the time to go to receive the mammography.
Long Island is home to one of the most famous genetic research facilities in the world. Scientists at the Cold Spring Harbor Research Laboratory won Nobel Prizes for the discovery of DNA. They are now working to unlock codes which may hold genetic secrets to breast cancer. In 1994, 1 in 9 began to underwrite research at the lab. In 1997, Dr. Michael Wigler isolated the P10 gene. This discovery was an important breakthrough, expected to have major implications for improved diagnostics and treatment for breast cancer.
I think the advocacy groups have been extremely aggressive in saying this is a problem that's affecting our mothers, ourselves, and our daughters, and we're not going to stand still for it. So it mobilizes whatever political forces there are to lend support. And it's part of a larger movement among women's groups to pressure the government into spending more of its research dollars into discovery of the causes and treatment of breast cancer. In particular, 1 in 9 itself funnels money and resources to our lab, which accelerates the research. And also, I think their support is felt by all the people, all the PhDs and graduate students and technicians in my lab who feel, that the local community cares about whether they succeed or not. And that motivates everybody.
By the mid-1990s, a number of research projects were studying breast cancer on Long Island. One of them, the Long Island Breast Cancer Study Project, brings together researchers and physicians from hospitals throughout Long Island and New York City to look at a number of possible causes, from genetic to environmental.
There is a basic principal investigator at Columbia University, Mary Lee Gammon, who is our principal investigator, who is investigating the effect of various chemicals on breast cancer. And there are 14 other projects that are involved in terms of electromagnetic fields, in terms of soil and dust analysis, in terms of comparative studies with places in Connecticut. And it's a very comprehensive study, but it's one small step for womankind, one small step.
University Hospital at the State University of Stony Brook on Long Island's East End is one of the hospitals taking part in this study. They have in their corner an important advocate. Former Long Island resident and breast cancer survivor Carol Baldwin is the mother of Hollywood actors Alec, Stephen, Billy, and Daniel Baldwin. A breast cancer research fund in her name has been established at Stony Brook Hospital. She recognizes that her family's fame is a magnet for fundraising, and they have been eager to support her as she crisscrosses the country speaking about her own experience with breast cancer.
To know that my family is behind me gives me more strength. I mean, it's very hard to work this by yourself. Not being knowledgeable about a lot of this stuff. I was a substitute teacher. I was in marketing research. You have to have somebody explain to you a lot of this stuff with fundraising, and the boys do a tremendous amount of it. I was asked at Stony Brook if they could dedicate the breast care center to me, and I said yes. And as of today, with my family, I have raised $1.7 million. So, and it's not even a year. But to me, the early detection is the main thing that I can stress to everybody. The breast examination once a month, And if they find anything they think is different, to see their doctor. And also, I think all these people should help out. If everybody sent in $1 in the world, you know how much money we'd have for research? You know, that's my big thing.
As Long Islanders joined the fight against breast cancer, many realized that there was enormous work still to be done. As a result, local breast cancer coalitions emerged. Today, virtually all of Long Island's communities are represented by these coalitions. 1 in 9 served as the launchpad for many of them.
The people who were involved and eventually came up with the coalition 1 in 9 were part of the Adelphi program, and at some point felt that they really wanted to go off on their own, that they felt they were ready to go back into the community and to set their own priorities and agendas, so they all went back into their communities.
Karen Miller, executive director of the Huntington Breast Cancer Action Coalition, was one of the first 1 in 9 founders to return to the community.
I started the Huntington Breast Cancer Action Coalition basically with an ad in the Penny Saver, an ad in my gym. If anybody were interested in working on the issue of breast cancer, to call me. 3 women called me immediately. We decided to call ourselves the Huntington Breast Cancer Action Coalition for the commonality of the name, and that we would act locally but think globally.
The Huntington Coalition's first task was their own mapping project, sending questionnaires to 72,000 households in the community. Their volunteer staff compiles the surveys, answers questions, and provides education through a number of outreach arenas. Over the years, they've become increasingly politically active on the local level.
Breast cancer, of course, is a political issue. We're the voters, and women's issues are #1 issues. So we intend to keep growing. That's specifically my focus, to have the movements keep growing, to start community groups in other areas so that we can become a very, very strong networking team. It's very important that we continue to grow and network, because I think that if we back off, dollars will be spent and not on breast cancer. And we are so close.
Community-based coalitions like Huntington's present one voice to the politicians and public alike, sponsoring educational conferences through the Breast Cancer Grassroots Organization for Unified Purpose, or BC Group for short. Recognizing the wisdom of strength in numbers, they present one voice to the politicians and public alike, sponsoring educational conferences and lobbying efforts. One of the strong assets of the activist movement on Long Island is a population that is both ethnically and racially diverse. Because of this diversity, additional specialized groups have emerged.
There is life after breast cancer. You have everything to live for and nothing to lose.
Wilma Carroll is a teacher on Long Island. After her lumpectomy in 1993, she went looking for information and support from other African American women who were breast cancer survivors. Sensing a need, she started a Long Island chapter of the National Breast Cancer Organization Sisters Network.
As I went looking for a support group, my main and my first choice was the Adelphi hotline, because that was basically all you knew about at that time. Because like I said, I knew very little. And from there, I learned about the support group that they have, which the class hadn't started yet, so I went in for one-on-one counseling. And that was very helpful because there it was personalized, and I could really let loose a lot of my fears in conversation. I didn't have to be afraid of what I said or how I felt and what I was going to find out or the answers, because it was just myself and a social worker. I have used my experience with breast cancer to reach out to other women in the community by starting a support group, Sisters Network. When I was diagnosed, I felt like there had to be something that I could do, and now I'm giving back to the community.
I met Wilma Carroll at it was a talk put on by the 100 Black Women, And Barbara Balaban was the speaker, and she's out of Adelphi. And Wilma was there. And I believe at the time, Wilma had a wig on, or she was going through her treatments. And I had finished mine. And she had this idea of this support group. And that's something that I had wanted to do also. And we met each other, gave each other phone numbers, and then left. And maybe 3 months down the line, I got a call from her, and she says, ready to start the support group? She says, I want you to come over and we'll have a meeting. And had a wonderful meeting.
Diane Gaines also met Wilma Carroll at Adelphi.
I went there for a while, and it was great to be able to talk to other ladies who had experienced the same thing and who had been through, just had been through some of the same things that I had been through. And then after that, we decided to start another support group for African American women, because we realized that some of the issues were not the same. Even though we were all diagnosed with breast cancer, that we had some issues that weren't the same.
My concern is that the doctors are treating the cancers differently in every woman. They're also treating them differently in every race. Maybe we have different cancers. Maybe they should be studied separately so that we can find out whether there are different cancers going between the races. That means there would be different treatment going between the races. And I pray that more focus will be put on the African American areas so that the study can be done in that group also.
Hart, Gaines, and Carroll met through Adelphi University, as did many of the women who formed the core of Long Island's breast cancer activist movement. They first found their voice through the university's hotline and support groups, which remain as the epicenter of information for breast cancer survivors. The hotline's impact is now international, and they have expanded their outreach programs to include a number of educational conferences and other activities.
And those who fought, struggled, and some of whom are here tonight with us to celebrate strength, courage, and life.
One of these activities is a gathering called the Celebration of Survivorship. In October 1997, 300 people attended that celebration to hear stories of triumph, courage, anger, and perseverance. One of the storytellers was Irene Virag, author of We're All in This Together, a book about 15 families facing breast cancer. She's a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter for the Long Island Daily Newsday, and her book chronicles the ongoing stories of a remarkable group of women and their families.
In all the stories I covered about the human condition for Newsday, all the tragedies I covered, all the sadness and the illnesses I wrote about, I always fell behind with the excuse of reporter's objectivity. As close as you can get to a subject, you still have to keep a little removed. You have to know that there's going to come a point where you're going to write a story. And I also felt that, I know viscerally, I know intellectually that something like homelessness and poverty could happen to me, but I never really felt that it would or could. It wasn't that way with breast cancer. I think breast cancer is every woman's fear.
Ironically, Virag was diagnosed with breast cancer just a year after her book was published.
I came back to Adelphi exactly a year after I had accepted the Benita Fury Award. And I talked about what it's like when time blinks and suddenly your whole universe is different. And for me it was as flattered as I had been the year before and as excited as I was to speak in front of this group. It was a professional achievement. Now I was talking as a woman with breast cancer to a group of people, many of them breast cancer survivors, and I had joined the sisterhood. I was part of a sorority that nobody really wants to pledge.
I've learned a lot about cancer and about life over the last 10 months. For one thing, there's nothing noble about breast cancer. Take it from me, cancer stinks. It will make you a better person, some people tell me. It'll make you stronger. It's a gift, they say. Well, I was a good person before, and I was a strong person. If cancer is a gift, show me the return counter.
For several years, Virag has been writing Newsday's gardening column. She sees parallels between her garden, her cancer, and her life.
Last spring and summer, I was still in the middle of chemotherapy, and we put a new garden in our front yard, and we call it the Garden of Health and Joy. And so far, it has certainly lived up to its name. It's just been a total joy for me. And even last year, when I was dealing with chemotherapy, I would spend time out in the garden. I couldn't do very much work in the garden, but I was out there with my cup of tea and sitting there enjoying all of the life that was going on in the garden, bees and butterflies, and it's just a profusion of flowers. And this year everything has come back, and it's really, to me, the garden is so much like a metaphor for life. And there's so much going on, there's so much activity, there's so much beauty. I always like to say that as a garden writer, there are analogies between breast cancer and the garden for me. As a garden writer, I write about life and death, and I write about hope and rebirth and courage, and it all just comes together for me in the garden.
Virag and other Long Island women actively and openly speak about their breast cancer. What connects them is an uncommon courage that has contributed to their survival.
So it was.
The women say that sharing their stories is a powerful means of spreading information and saving lives.
But I could feel it. Mammogram never
And
picked
is
it
an
up.
important way to offer hope and encouragement to others.
They took us in front of, it's a teaching hospital, and they took us in front of a bunch of students, and there were about 4 or 5 ladies sitting there, and they had us try to raise our hand, and then of course we had the bandages on, and I was the only one in the group that could raise my hand that high. And he said, that woman will be able to do anything that she did before. And if I have a bad golf day, I can always blame it on my right arm. It's a good excuse. The only time I talk about it now is when I meet a very young person and they're going through it. And they have to take a look at a woman like myself and say, well, she came through it. Maybe so will I.
By being in the teaching profession, I've helped children all my life by trying to educate them. So now I'm trying to teach and educate adults by making them aware of breast cancer.
I'm a survivor.
I am a breast cancer survivor.
Let's talk about it. Check your breasts. Get them checked. We're survivors.
To overcome the fears of breast cancer and what they can do to survive it, and to just lend support for them, someone that they can talk to and ask their questions and discuss their fears and their problems and their relationships and family problems that might come about with having breast cancer.
When someone is newly diagnosed with breast cancer, certainly they need someone to reach out to them. And the way you do that is through sharing your own experiences and your own story. What helped me most was the the absolute flood of calls I got from the Adelphi University Breast Cancer Hotline, people that I had never known before, of course never knew existed, was so kind and so caring. They reached out, shared their own stories with me, and gave me a great deal of hope, so that my normally positive attitude really became ebullient. As ridiculous as that sounds, I felt I was part of a new sisterhood, a new sorority.
Diane Nannery joined the Breast Cancer Sisterhood in 1993. As Long Island manager for consumer affairs for the Postal Service, she decided that the U.S. mail should deliver a different kind of message. Her efforts resulted in the nation's first breast cancer postage stamp.
So I wrote a Dear Editor letter to a weekly and a daily in every major city in the country, just saying, hi, my name is Diane Nannery and I'd like to see us get a breast cancer stamp. And I let people know that they could send their letters or petitions, and I gave them the address. I wrote to women's health magazines, you name it, I did it. And then the media picked up on it. And I think it was because it was sort of like David that took on Goliath. Here was this bald woman on chemo trying to get a breast cancer stamp. The Postal Service received almost 800,000 letters and petition signatures from around the country. Not everybody can or chooses to be an activist, but I think it gave those women that are survivors a way to channel their anger and their frustration at this disease that takes over our life. And I think it gave the family members of those women who lost their battle, or those men, it gave them a way to remember their loved ones. I'm very proud of the breast cancer stamp. I don't think I'll ever be able to look at her and not get emotional.
Nannery's contribution to the fight showed both courage and creativity. That creative voice is also shared by Marilyn Hacker, a breast cancer survivor who is an award-winning poet and professor at Long Island's Hofstra University. Her book of poems is called Winter Numbers.
Men and women, mortally wounded where we love and nourish, dying at 30, 40, 50, not on barricades, but in beds of unfulfilled promise. Tell me, senators, what you call abnormal. Each day's obits read as if there's a war on. 58-year-old poet dead of cancer, warrior woman laid down with the other warrior women. Both times when the telephone rang, I answered, wanting not to, knowing I had to answer. Go from two bodies, infinite approach to a crest of pleasure, through the disembodied voice at a distance, saying one loved body was clay, one wave of mind burst and broken. Each time, we went back to each other's hands and mouths as to a requiem where the chorus sings death with irrelevant and amazing bodily music.
The contribution these women have made to the fight shows both courage and creativity. That same courage and creative spirit inhabits Hewlett House, a place which merges information, caring, and support. The women of 1 in 9 dreamed about such a place where women could gather in a home-like setting. Nassau County's donation of a 200-year-old historic landmark has enabled them to realize that dream. After renovations are complete, Hewlett House will provide a full array of breast cancer support services for women and their families, and something more.
I want this home to be about life. I want it to be filled with happiness. I want it to be filled with future, the future of the next generation. I want people to be able to gather information. I want them to be able to be helped. I want to be able to reach out to people who don't have insurance, people who can't get out, people who have 4, 5, and 6 children who are in need. This will be a place for them to go. There should be a coffee pot on 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. They could stare out the window, they can have a hand to hold, a room for meditation, a room for film and video, someone who can come in and not know what a mammography is like and be able to put it on a film and close the door in private. Counseling, very important, support. A communication center where they can reach out and not know how to use a computer, but touch a screen and get into the Mayo Clinic or Sloan Kettering. A library filled with resources so that they can get a book and sit on an overstuffed couch in the living room and feel comfort, where there will be people there always to help them. We'll have gardens, meditation gardens, memorial gardens. We'll have an herb garden. We'll have a children's garden, a vegetable garden. Even the outhouse, we're leaving and we're putting plumbing in. And I want to see, in my mind, I picture painted on the sides, giant sunflowers flowers with little squirrels peeping out, you know. That's what Hewlett House is all about.
Inside Hewlett House, many voices will be heard. The voices of activists, educators, legislators, researchers, the voices of children, the voices of survivors, the voices of those no longer here to speak for themselves, the voice of hope.
And those of us that are well and those of us that are strong, let us write letters for those that aren't, and let us march for people that can't, and let us sing for those that can't sing for themselves. And we'll make it. Women are going to make it. I know they will, and we're getting stronger every day. And we're standing independent every day, more independent. And we know what we're worth, and we think a lot more of ourselves than we ever did before. And we deserve it. We absolutely deserve it.
Someday there will be a morning when we wake to the news that the answers have been found, that breast cancer has been cured. When that day occurs, and in all of the days after, the daughters, sons, granddaughters, and grandsons, and all of the beautiful babies not yet born will owe an incredible debt of gratitude to these women who gave of themselves, their strength, and their courage. That day may arrive soon or far off in the future. Until it does, these Long Island women will keep pointing the way, with one goal, with one vision, and with one voice.
I'm a survivor. I'm a 4-year survivor.
I have been a breast cancer survivor for 4 years.
I've been a breast cancer survivor for 1.5 years.
I have been a survivor for 3 years.
I've been a survivor for 5 years.
I've been a breast cancer survivor for 3 years and counting.
I've been a breast cancer survivor 8 years.
I have been a survivor for 28 years.